The following presentation was made possible by supporters like you. Consider making an impact today by honoring Science for Georgia with a gift, or by joining our Catalyzer network. Thank you, and enjoy.
This is the third of our Fireside chats. These all came out of our Environmental Justice and Climate Protection Conference that Science for Georgia, Dogwood Alliance, Emory Charter, and Center for Black Women's Wellness put together in June. And Andrea and everyone else was part of a panel that we just wanted to give more time to and have more of a discussion. So Science for Georgia, we are a nonprofit here in Georgia. I'd say mostly focused or at least located in Atlanta, but we're trying to do more about the rest of the state this next upcoming year. So we started in 2018. We came out of the Emerge for Science. We wanted to build a network so that people would regain trust in science, open up the discussion, and have more of an interest in just incorporating science and the world around them. So we do that through three pillars. One of them is improving communication. Scientists are not the great at messaging. So we try to help them, we teach them how to talk to people, how to talk to the public, how to talk to legislators, how to talk to business people. We give them opportunities and the public opportunities to engage with scientists, to learn about what they're doing, how it works, how research is done, and the interesting things about their world. So then we also work with the legislators in the Capitol to advocate for the use of science and public policy. And this is where a lot of our environmental side of things comes into play, because there are a lot of challenges that we face here in Georgia that really need to open up to other places. So we do these by doing our education communication classes. We talk to the Atlanta Science Festival, and we have events with children. We have roundtables where we're talking with legislators, business leaders, and farmers, all sorts of people. We run the conference. This is another one of our roundtables that ended up with some legislation. So we worked with literacy and got March declared Georgia Reading Month. And so that was a nice success. Now we're fighting against the mining concern in the Okeechobee Swamp. I'm at a co-working space, so it looks very busy here. But yeah, so that's what Science for Georgia is. That's why we were doing these things. And thank you very much for coming. And I want to introduce Andrea Jones. I'm going to pass it to Karen for that introduction.
Thank you, Patrick. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Fireside Chat, a collaboration event hosted by the Science for Georgia and Georgia One. Today, we are gathered to explore the vital topic of social justice and having a better climate and community for all Black and Brown communities. We aim to foster a conversation that raises awareness, inspires action, and create a path towards a healthier and more sustainable future for all. Georgia One focused on quality of life issues, health hazard resulting from nuclear energy and weapons, and social justice that are grounded in building social equity, racial equity. Excuse me. With us today, we have Andrea Jones, who is the Government Relation and Public Policy Director for Georgia One. She has served in senior roles overseeing successful public policy and social justice campaign, promoting economic and environmental justice programs and anti-discrimination legislation. In this segment, Mrs. Jones will dive in more about topics of social justice, community relations, and why promoting economic and environmental issues is vital to the social justice. Please help me give a warm virtual clap by welcoming Andrea Jones. Take it away, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Karen and Patrick. Thank you. And I'm really happy to be here. I like the idea of the fireside chat. I know where that came from. That was under the Roosevelt administration when he was speaking to people on the radios about, I believe it was about World War II, and encouraging Americans to be involved and giving them encouragement and basically kind of being, I guess, a father figure. So I like the idea of this. I'm glad that you all reached out to me, and I'm honored to be able to present to you all today. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Make sure I do the right thing. Okay, and then let me go ahead and start the slideshow. So, of course, what Karen said, I'm with Georgia WAN. That stands for Women's Actions for New Direction. And we are located here in Atlanta, Georgia. We have an office here. About 3 of us work in the office, our executive director and our office manager. But then we also have 2 people working off-site in Burke County, Waynesboro, who are our deputy director and our engagement director. So we are basically in 2 locations. In the CSRA area, which is Burke County, where we do a lot of work, and where Waynesboro is, where Plant Vogel is, which I will go into, and where not too far from the SRS. Okay, so Georgia WAN empowers low-income and minority communities to advocate for climate, environmental, and social justice, which is grounded in racial equity, which basically that means that we basically look at how race and how income impacts people's lives and how it impacts people's environment. We acknowledge that there's an intersectionality between environmental social justice injustices from nuclear energy infractions and climate change, whose impacts exacerbate the livelihood and viability of systemically underserved and under-resourced communities. Georgia WAN continues to sound the alarm of environmental, climate, and social injustices, and strives to come up with healthy and equitable solutions to reduce nuclear harm in our communities. Giving you an idea of how we basically do that is through corporate accountability and trying to work with Plant Vogel and Georgia Power to find ways to help families that have worked in those plants and have experienced any type of health disparities or issues to get the care that they need. Also, we recognize that nuclear energy has really come to the forefront in terms of how people or how Georgia, decides that they are going to provide resources, energy resources to people. Georgia WAN is not so much against nuclear energy, but we don't see it as clean energy. We know that renewable energy is clean energy, but we are trying to work to find a path forward, working with our local partners and other organizations to push for renewable energy solutions. Because we also know that people who live in these communities, especially who work at Plant Vogel, that is their livelihood. And so we have to kind of walk a tentative tightrope in terms of how we advocate, but that is our focus and that is our goal out there in that area. So this is our environmental justice work. We work statewide, bridging the urban and rural divide in our frontline communities in Waynesboro, as I mentioned, in Burke County, and communities in the rural portion of the eastern Georgia and central Savannah River area. Those are surrounded by commercial nuclear power plants like Plant Vogel, which, as I mentioned, the weapons facility and the energy burdened neighborhoods in Atlanta's Neighborhood Planning Unit, which is NPUV, where residents are overwhelmed by exorbitant energy bills and go toward expanding nuclear power facilities in Burke County. So we know that you have a rural and then you have an urban issue. They don't have to compete, right? They all have their issues. They all have things and concerns. And so we try to bring those to the forefront with the understanding that there doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. We can assist and work to provide the energy and the resources and the bandwidth for people living in the rural areas of Georgia, while also understanding what is happening in the urban areas of Georgia. So our racial equity has 4 focus groups of work: the quality of life, the health hazards, including reduction of nuclear energy, which I mentioned before, and how nuclear weapons and the impacts our air, our water, and our soil, but then also looking at climate justice. If you look at worldwide, globally, the countries and the communities are going to probably suffer the most in terms of as the sea rises, or most of your lower end below the equator continents and countries that are going to basically share the burden of climate change earlier in terms of their land mass shrinking, especially coastal communities as well. And a lot of those areas right now, as you might imagine, are very expensive. They have high land value. But as time goes on, those that will probably change, and it will affect people in a very impactful way. So environmental justice, we see it as a new civil rights. We look at it as being a broad type of concern that affects everyone, whether you are Black, brown, white, whether what ethnicity you are, whether your income is. So our environment shapes who we are. It shapes our wealth attainment. The quality of our schools and our overall health and well-being are determined by our environment. Past and present environmental injustices negatively impacts all Georgians and affects the quality of our air and water. Georgia is number 10 in the states with the highest amount of chemical releases that affect human development. The Middle Savannah is also one of the top 20 waterways with the highest releases of chemicals affecting human development. Affects our health. Georgia exceeds the national average in incidence of prostate cancer in males, breast cancer in females, and lung and bronchus cancer in everyone. Property. A lot of people don't think about this, how your environment affects your property, but proximity to certain facilities, landfills, waste sites, hazardous manufacturing facilities, and power plants reduce property values in their direct vicinity up to 5.3%. And such concerns range from the concerns about health risks, the public image of the community, and impact property markets and values. And this really matters because and this isn't just an issue, I think, in the United States or just in Georgia. This is, I think, globally. There was a study done overseas in Sweden, or was it Finland? It was one of the countries that you were looking at, and they were trying to do a study to see whether your proximity to a facility, to an industrial site, would lower your property value. And it does. They found that it does. You might not be getting sick from whatever the emissions or whatever's coming out of that facility, but in terms of where you live, it will affect you economically, right? And the further you are away from a facility, the higher your property value, which affects low-income people as well, because what happens is that they cannot live in high opportunity communities. They can't afford to purchase a home or rent an apartment in an area that basically does not have the types of eyesores or blight or any of the industrial facilities that people who have a higher income. It also affects education here in Georgia, because part of our education is funded through property taxes, right? So if you live in a low income area and you have low property taxes, then your schools are also going to have limited resources that are going to basically be coming to you and to your children to help them enhance their educational experience. One of the ways that that could happen, that we could change that, is basically having just a regular pot of how we fund our education, right? And then looking at those areas that need additional assistance. But your property, to me, should not guarantee how economically viable your school is. And then also we look at wealth attainment. Cumulative toxin, industrial pollution, and waste depreciates land value. So let's say you want to sell your home. You can't get the value that you probably put it in, especially if some industry was built near your home or in your community after you purchased it. If you want to fix up your home or get a loan, or if you want to use your home to pay for your children's education, you are hamstrung because the location that you are in is going to limit the amount of funding that you can get for your home. So as I mentioned, Burke County is in a public health crisis because you are dealing with Plant Vogtle. You are also dealing with the SRS. And in 2019, Georgia One started the work of establishing a public health baseline metric in partnership with Georgia State University's Master of Social Work Department. And the data obtained spanned approximately 50 years in 36 health categories. It compared 10 years before Plant Vogtle started and 18 years after the startup in Burke County. And although the work was interrupted by COVID-19 pandemic, the findings of the study are highlighted right here. So if you look at comparatively what was happening, death and respiratory diseases, I believe, increased by 38.8% in that area over that particular time. If you look at the death by infectious and parasite diseases, that increased significantly. If you look at the death by digestive diseases, that increased. And I think that has a lot to do with the food, because Burke County is a very rural area. Overall, Georgia, in terms of our economics, is we are an agrarian type of community, in the sense of our gross domestic product, right? agriculture is one of the highest economic engines in Georgia. So if we produce, if our growing and producing of food is in an area that has a high uptick of emissions or of pollution in the air, then that's probably getting in our food. So, and that has that can have basically a detrimental effect. And one of the things that is interesting, and I'm speaking to scientists here, I believe in people who know this, but you know, things might not happen at the snap of a finger. I might not breathe in the toxin air, and then in a week or in a day, I'm exhibiting symptoms. But over the years, that will come into play. And then as women, in terms of women who are childbearing age, we can pass that on to our children. That has played a significant role in why we are advocating for renewable energy, but then also to look at other policy solutions that we can do to help communities that have been overburdened by pollution. So if you look here, the American Lung Association in April 2023 released a report, and they found that Georgia, #1 Georgia city on the most polluted list is Augusta, which is in the CSR area and in Richmond County. Also, 4 counties got D for ozone. Atlanta, which is Fulton County. So you have DeKalb, Douglas, Fulton, and Henry County. And then 3 counties got a D for PM. That's particulate matter. And that was Daughtry, Houston, and Richmond County. And if you can see here, Richmond County is twice, which includes Augusta. And then you have Bibb County, and Washington County, and Macon is in Bibb County, just to give you an idea. So if you look at just about in all the counties in Georgia, especially around the east, and I think the northern area, you are dealing with an issue of toxins, and you are dealing with the issue of emissions, and you are dealing with an issue of pollution that is going to have a cumulative effect on our health, but then also will trickle down, to use a Republican or conservative phrase, because they believe economics trickles down and money trickles down. But I think health disparities and issues for pollution will trickle down into communities that will cause even more despair for people. Also, if you look at the overall life expectancy in years, right, for the state of, for the whole nation, if you look here, you can see that the Deep South, which is your ex-Confederate states, right, has the lowest life expectancy in the nation. And I think that has a lot to do with those historical issues that come into play with that, right? In terms of the policies that were made, but it's also not only historical issues that come into play, but there's policy issues, and there's also issues of wealth and income attainment and education. So I'm going to stop here and play this video really quickly. It's about maybe, I would say, 5 minutes long. And it's about from Augusta epidemiologist and Dr. Justin Xavier Moore. And he combed through 2 decades worth of data on cancer deaths in all of 159 Georgia counties. And he says he's surprised about what he found. And so I'm going to go ahead and start playing this. Let me know.
When I served, my work was
this.
critical. And I don't feel like that.
Sorry about that.
It got so bad that I was even thinking about suicide.
Whatever you're dealing with, call the Veterans Crisis Line.
Groundbreaking research, 20 years in the making. A local epidemiologist and doctor find cancer hotspots right here at home and beyond, all over the state of Georgia. The hotspots specifically look at some of the deadliest cancers: breast cancer, colon, prostate cancer, and lung cancer. The I-Team's Meredith Anderson exposes what local counties have the greatest risk of deadly cancers.
Dr. Justin Xavier Moore combed through 2 decades worth of data on cancer deaths in every single county in Georgia. All 159 of them. Even he was surprised by what he found.
I didn't know it was going to be that many clusters within like the CSRA.
Dr. Moore is an epidemiologist and assistant professor at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. He tells the I-Team his latest research is currently under peer review, but the American Association of Cancer Research asked him to share his findings this week at their annual meeting. So should people be alarmed when they hear this?
Yes. I mean, it's a hotspot, right? So this is 20 years of data that are suggesting that the areas that are highlighted have been continuously disproportionately affected by these diseases. And something must be done
He doesn't want his findings to scare you, but rather empower you. And if you live in certain areas, to know your risk is even higher. Using medical data from 1999 to 2019, he identified cancer hotspots across the state. He found Burt County as a hotspot for deadly prostate cancer in both white and Black men, and for deadly colorectal cancer in Black men and women. The county is also rural, has a high rate of poverty, and is home to Plant Vogel. Where do you even begin to know what caused it? Now that you know the hotspots are here, is it environmental? Is it diet? Is it family history? I mean, where do you even begin?
That's the point in why we do like this epidemiological research, because now we highlight the issue, and then to understand the etiology, to understand what risk factors are driving it, then that's further research. I hate to say that as a scientist, but that's like further investigation.
McDuffie and Wilkes counties was found to be a deadly colorectal cancer hotspot for all adults, no matter race or gender. McDuffie County also found to be a deadly lung cancer hotspot for Black adults. Jefferson and Jenkins counties, a deadly colorectal cancer hotspot for white men and women. Warren County, a breast cancer hotspot for all women, a lung cancer hotspot for Black men, and a colorectal cancer hotspot for all adults. Glasscock County, a hotspot for prostate cancer in Black men, colorectal cancer in Black adults, and lung cancer in adults, both Black and white. But it wasn't just our rural communities that were problematic. Dr. Moore uncovered Richmond County was found to be a prostate cancer death hotspot in white men.
So even though we have the Georgia Cancer Center here in Richmond County, you have individuals that are living in these communities that may not have a relationship with health providers in this area. There's a lot of hesitancy in terms of even getting care. That can be driven by medical racism. It can be driven by the fact that health insurance is contingent upon your job status and whether you actually have the time to go get the care.
Dr. Moore said medical data was used to identify a deadly cancer hotspot in Anderson, South Carolina, where Chadwick Boseman grew up. You may remember before his Black Panther fame, Boseman played the godfather of soul and even came to Augusta for the Get On Up movie premiere in 2014. In 2020, news of his death from early onset colorectal cancer shocked the world. He was just 43 years old.
Guess what other county identified as a hotspot for early onset colorectal cancer? I'm take a guess.
Richmond County.
Richmond County.
That's right.
Richmond County was the only county in Georgia. And it put it within the top 5% in terms of risk for dying for early onset colorectal cancer for the entire nation.
So what to do now with that information? Be proactive versus reactive.
A lot of people actually have symptoms and they would just kind of dismiss it as, oh, you know, that's just me aging. Yeah, we're aging, but with increasing age comes increased risk of cancer.
And know your risks beyond your zip code. Know your family risks. Know your lifestyle risks. Are you a smoker? Overweight? Are you stressed? If so, push for earlier screenings.
There are a lot of great treatments. There are a lot of great therapeutics that people in this cancer center here are working on, and we have assets too. But oftentimes we just don't know about it. We don't know about, hey, like I can actually go get a simple prostate exam, and that may save my life. So don't wait. And so for me, it's about not waiting until it's too late, or thinking that it may not happen to you.
Now, overall, the study found Georgia counties with the deadliest cancer outcomes tend to be more rural, have higher poverty rates, a higher percentage of Black residents, and an overall older population. Dr. Moore says to make daily changes to reduce your risk, 30 minutes of exercise, reducing your stress, and eating more vegetables. Each lifestyle change you make can add up when it comes to your health and your life.
I serve.
Sorry. Okay, let me try to get back here. Okay, so really quickly, one of the things that stuck out to me when I first saw that was how broad it was and how they included white men and white women, right? Because when you think about those areas or think about the issues of environmental justice or social justice or civil rights, white people and Black people and people, period, I think here, especially in the United States, don't see white people as being affected, right? And they look to see as people who are, you know, your marginalized groups to be more impacted. That is true in a sense, and in terms of maybe when you look at percentages, right? But there are more white people in the world, or more, well, in the country, and there are more white people in the state of Georgia. So more white people are going to be impacted by anything that happens in this state, right? And so to change that narrative, I liked where he was going in terms of being able to look at the study and look at the counties and see that everyone is affected. And as he said, basically low-income people are probably impacted more because they don't have the resources, right, to be able to address their health concerns. So you have, so everyone is impacted, but your ability to be able to address that or move from it or change your lifestyle, to me, is determined on your income and your education attainment. And so that is kind of where the disconnect is, and where I see there's a gap that we could basically work in. And that's what Georgia One is trying to do in terms of educating, but also looking at policy and changing the narrative around environmental justice, looking at it in terms of a justice for all, you know, looking at it in terms of an understanding that everybody is impacted, and looking at from understanding of a high level from a state drop down to say, okay, what is the state going to do to address this? And then how are we going to basically look at maybe some disparities in minority groups and based on our racial segregation in history, but then also how we are going to decrease the rates of cancer, the rates of asthma, and all the things that are happening in our state. And so that is basically kind of where Georgia One is going, and why I really wanted you all to see this video. So basically, I said, how did we get here? So one of the ways that we got here was we have too much of a tendency to put these problems on individuals. I thought that was kind of interesting what the news reporter said about what you can do. You know, he mentioned that it's mostly in, you know, people who are Black people, mostly people who are low income. And so I think when he did that, he kind of maybe made people who are not low income and who are not Black feel a little better about what they heard. And maybe that might have helped him feel better about what he heard, but he is still impacted. So cardiologist Donald Lloyd Jones, which is the past president of the American Heart Association, chairs of preventive medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago, where my sister graduated from, said this, and I'll repeat it again: we have too much of a tendency to put these problems on individuals when it is very much the policy environment that shapes just how long and how well a person can live. You know, we want to say, oh, well, you're overweight, or you're eating inappropriately. Yes, that's a contributor, right? But there's also policies that come into that, right? Okay, what are we putting in our food? You know, what that is causing that? You know, do people have access to gyms and to places in their community where they can walk, right? Do people have time to exercise, right? Do low-income people who work at McDonald's or work at fast food, do they have time to do that? Do they have the resources to do that? The places on the map that I showed that basically showed the life expectancy map, you'll see orange and red have structural and systemic issues that limit people's ability to have socioeconomic opportunity. Remember, I mentioned the ex-Confederate states, access to healthcare. We don't have the Medicaid expansion here, and the Georgia state officials and government is basically anti-ACA, right? The Affordable Care Act. Or achieve maximum levels of education. I talked about education in terms of how we fund our education. All of these policies affect your health, and these disparities in longevity absolutely reflect social and structural and historical practices in those regions. So you remember when they say the South shall rise again, for those who are kind of history buffs of the Confederacy, well, this is an example of that, right? The South back in the 1800s, right before the Civil War, was very individualistic. It was a slaveocracy, and it was basically a racial hierarchy. And so when that changed and Reconstruction came in, and they tried to basically create a harmonious and polarity of people living together and working together, there was a backlash with that. And then Jim Crow came in, and we are living the results of that. The Environmental Justice Act is one of the things that Georgia One is advocating for to address these issues, right? To address the past environmental injustices that occurred, and to also look at how the state is doing now in its permitting and its regulatory functions to ensure that communities are not overburdened, right? And that bad actors do not continue to be able to receive permits to build facilities or run facilities in the state. So our mission is that the Georgia General Assembly adopt an Environmental Justice Act in the 2024 legislative session, that's next session, that will submit the practice of equal protection and equal response to environmental harms and hazards, right? Some areas, you know, they immediately jump on when they see issues. In other areas, they take their time, and that's based on, that can be economics, that can be race, could be a number of reasons behind it, but it's still unfair. The prevention and enforcement of mitigation measures through state and local governments, communities, citizens, industries, and agencies by partnering to promote healthy communities along with clean and safe ecosystems. So we're thinking about, you know, looking at how we can get every state agency to look at how it does its work and to include environmental issues in that, right? The state of the Department of Education, how does the environment play in the schools? How many schools are in certain areas? What is the conditions of those schools? The Department of Community Affairs that does housing and gives down payment assistance for communities, families who, you know, want to purchase a home, new home buyers. What are they doing to ensure that homes that are built are not built in areas that have a high propensity of having facilities, and then applying adopted measures throughout the state of Georgia, regardless of county, race, income, urban and rural communities. One thing I noticed in Georgia as an adult, and I saw that, I grew up here. I moved away in 2001 and lived in Houston, Texas for a while, and then came back here about maybe 7 years later. 7 years ago. And I noticed around the time during the election in 2016, and then also maybe in 2018, there's a tendency in Georgia, and it might be in other places, to be very negative towards Atlanta and to Fulton County and to some of the other counties, to Cobb and Cobb. Especially in that rural urban divide. There, you know, there's a sense or an idea that they don't like Atlanta, or they don't like Fulton County, or they don't like the people living there. And if you look at some of the political campaigns, a lot of the ads from a lot of rural area candidates or candidates who are in that CSR area were very, very negative and saying that they're going to keep, you know, the city or Atlanta away from you, or, you know, we're going to fight for you to get what it is you need because they get too much of it. It to me, it drives more of a divide, and the idea that we are competing for resources when we don't have to do that. That is a zero-sum game. That is not true. And that also that if you're helping one group or one community or one county or assisting in them, then you're taking away from another. So Georgia One and our coalition partners, Eco Action, Science for Georgia, Green Analytics, are working to pass Environmental Justice Act in the state that have established, and we have established the Environmental Justice Law Work Group convening to set the policy priorities and planned advocacy, because we have to, you know, this is not something that, you know, the lawmakers are going to do on their own. You have lawmakers who are introducing legislation, but they can only introduce and try to get their fellow lawmakers to endorse and support and vote for it. But not everybody's going to do that unless they get a push from their communities, especially a push from people who are their voters, right? Who they represent. And so we are starting that process by working within the state, doing statewide advocacy to push for Environmental Justice Act, by highlighting the concerns that people have, by showing them that how environmental justice not only affects their health, but affects their wealth and their education and their property. But then also letting them know that there is a resource, there is a way that we can work together to address that and have a better future. So we hope that you can join us in the work to pass the act. If you click the link to get involved, this is a get involved survey link right here, and then I will highlight it and put it in the chat if you all are interested in joining us. And I hope you are. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Andrea. That was wonderful. I guess to start off with, and you mentioned this a couple times, What are some of the biggest challenges for fighting that tribalism viewpoint? Because that's always been one of those situations. It's been around since like the early 70s and 80s, where you had people who were on the same socioeconomic level, but their politicians or leaders were telling them that they were better than the people on the other side of the street. Weirdly, I know that humans, we tend to view things that way, like, oh, well, at least I have it slightly better than this other person. How do you fight that? Like, what is your biggest push for doing that?
Economics. That's why we're going towards the property issue in terms of looking at income. One of the things that I noticed in terms of our beginning push in interacting with legislators, especially lawmakers who represent those rural areas, is that they were more receptible, Republicans especially, to the idea that environment was affecting income, right? Affecting wealth. I know that, economics can be very, what is the word I'm looking for? Not trite, but kind of not as serious. People can think that that is kind of like a greedy way of looking at it, right? Like I'm losing money and therefore I only care about money. But one of the things that I think people have been able to be able to relate to is the idea of access to income. That's where the whole idea of unions came in. There are people who understand that community-wise, that we benefit when we work together. The problem is that, as you said, there's a tribalism in that where they think that I'm not like them, I'm better than them, and I don't need to be a part of them to make that happen. But that is not always together true. And so as we begin to show how the resources that we have available, especially the types of supplemental types of things that we have, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, the ACA, all of those things that affect people's income, that each group is basically is able to have access to. We're able to kind of bridge that divide. So like when Social Security is on the chopping block, you don't see that tribalism. When Medicaid is on the chopping block, you don't see that tribalism. Like the AARP, they're all up in it. You don't hear that tribalism when it comes to that type of stuff. So when we look at economics and we look at people's ability to grow economically, we get a better, we don't get so much tribalism. Now, salary, wages, somewhat, housing, somewhat, health, somewhat, yes, we do get the tribalism. But I think economics is different. When I speak to women about education, especially white women, about education here in Georgia, a lot of them did not put together the idea of property value. They were like, I didn't even think about that. And even though I live in Fulton County and I'm in North Fulton, right, and it has a higher property value than South Fulton, I'm probably still not getting the best bang for my buck, right? Because it depends on where you're zoned, right? So you get the sense, you see it starting to kind of go like, oh, that's true. Even when you talk about education, the whole idea they're bringing out charter schools and not wanting to fund public schools, and looking at education choice. When I bring up the whole idea of, is it a true choice if the only good school in your community is a private school? I mean, if you shouldn't have to default to a private school, right? You should say, oh, I want to send my children to that private school because I went there, or because I want them to learn, that I want them to go to a Catholic school, I'm going to parochial school, or I want my children to take Bible class. That's fine. That's all good. And but that should be a choice that you make, not a default, right? And so when you put it that way, in the sense of your choice, even though you might not be like these white people, your choice is being taken away from you because you don't have the income, right? Or then that gets the light bulb going.
Okay. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I'll open the floor up to anybody else who has questions.
Hi, good morning. It's me. I have a question. So how can local communities in Georgia become more involved in advocating for environmental justice and sustainable climate solutions?
Well, they can join us, Georgia One, to come aboard and be a partner. But one of the things that I think would be good for local communities to do is to advocate with their state legislator and their state senator, right? These are the people who make the types of policy decisions, right, that protect their community. They are basically your frontline person who is supposed to know what's happening in your community, know what's happening in the district, and provide the resources and the pushback that is needed to ensure that you are not adversely affected. I know that's easier said than done, because sometimes your representative might not be somebody who you voted for, right? Or somebody who you wanted, or you don't have someone easy access to. And that's where getting involved in using your already the networks that you already have. There, even though people might not be a member of a nonprofit that promotes energy justice, you might be in a parent group, right? You might be in a PTA. You might be in your homeowners association. You might be, so you can discuss that there. You can bring it to the forefront and say, I got this information. I think you all should be aware of this. This is something that you could utilize. This is something I'm interested in that I want to share. And so, you might not have to have the solution as to how to fix it, but you can inform. So use your networks that you already have, even your non-traditional ones, right? And then also advocate, with your local elected official. Also, I would encourage people, as they get more involved, as they understand things more, I would encourage them to either run for office themselves, right? Get involved in community advocacy and run for office. But then also, I would also encourage them to support and find candidates that want to do what you want to do, right? That's one thing that Georgia One sees as a mission for us, is finding EJ candidates, people who want to run on a platform to address environmental justice and see it as a broad type of thing that needs to happen in Georgia, and wants to promote policies from education to health to employment to housing around that framework.
Okay, great. We do have a question in the chat from Oscar Jones. Will there also be a balancing act between increasing property values and property taxes that make homeowner monthly payments go up? Like a community fights for landfill, polluting plants, property values go up, taxes go up, portion of the house payment goes up. That's an economic impact there too.
Yes, it is. People. It is. It very much is. So not only that your as community fights for landfills and polluting and balancing and all of those things that come up with taxes going up, people are basically, you're funding basically your own demise in terms of your own your own limited economic viability, but then also your education too and your health. So yes, definitely, we need to definitely have a balancing act. The whole idea of the Environmental Justice Act though is to share the burden. So because we have to understand, I think that one of the things that it gets missing, especially with climate change and the whole debate over that, is that we do need energy, right? The issue with people, we know we need energy. It's how we produce it, right? That matters, We do need economy, right? We need, a resource in order for us to be able to earn an income, in order for us, especially if we're going to have a capitalist society, right? And we also need to have health. We also need to have housing. There's those things don't have to compete, right? Those are basic needs that we have to have. So we need to find a way to be able to share that burden of producing that energy, right? In an equitable fashion, right? And then we also need to recognize that the past injustices, the things that have happened from policies in the past, need to be rectified, right? We need to look at that and find ways in order to do that. And people don't really like that, and affirmative action was a way of rectifying something, right? Black people were denied opportunity because of race. Therefore, in order to address that, you have to look at race, right? But people don't like that. They fight against that because they think that is itself racism, where it's not. But if you don't look at the impacted communities, then you can't address the issue, right? And if you and so we need to find a way, a balancing act, to ensure that as we look at past injustices, that people who are experiencing problems now recognize that they are not being left out, and that this is a way to bring people up to a level playing field, right? And that you don't lose anything, from that.
Yeah. To go into a slightly different vein, with Plan Vogel, and those areas there, is there any results yet in terms of what might be causing those healthcare spikes?
They have not delved deeply into that yet, because our studies had ended, but Georgia One is getting ready to do another study. We applied for a grant through EPA, looking at some policy issues. Looking at the health disparities within the CSRA area, and then coming up with a policy where it will be basically new. Because the whole idea for the EPA is they said they didn't want to look at any types of disparities or any types of issues, and then think of policies or solutions that we could use in order to fix that. And so we're going to try to drill down, right, in that to get that information, to be able to see what the results are in terms of what you're basically asking, and then formulate, basically design a program or policy to address that. And submit and basically use that as a vehicle to be able to promote things throughout the nation. And so if we get that grant, then we'll be able to kind of delve deeper and provide that information.
Yeah, I was specifically asking because I know that there's a lot of newer nuclear power plant ideas, especially like thorium reactors, which are much smaller, much safer. In general, and I think there's even one group that is trying to revive the nuclear power recycling. So where they take the used waste and actually turn it into something that they can generate more power for, and then
I didn't know
really
that.
Does that.
I didn't know that. That's
it's a group that has been kind of working on it, I think. Since it's an idea that they do in other parts of the world. Japan does it, and a couple other places do it. It got cut out in I want to say the Carter administration, because part of what they do is they basically refine it and then pull out the things that they can't use, and it's I want to say it's a 5%, and then they can reuse the rest of it. But it is a way that does end up creating at least a little bit of plutonium, and that's that was seen as the risk during the 60s and 70s. So they're starting to redo that now, but that should also help us create a slightly more, let's call it, environmentally friendly, human friendly nuclear power when we eventually get to that point.
Yeah. And see, a lot of people don't know that. That's one of the reasons why we're promoting for the Environmental Justice Act, because it is to create a commission, right, or advisory commission based on from the Georgia State Legislature. They can decide if they want to appoint people or serve on it themselves. That will look at all this stuff, right? That will be able to have kind of a top line view and drill down to see what's the safest way we can do to address it. So if we're looking at Plant Vogel, right? If we're looking at Plant Vogel being in Burke County and Waynesboro, which is a hot spot, we've already shown that. Can we find a solution? Can we find a way for Plant Vogel to still exist, but then also to reduce the risk? Because one of the things that I learned is that you can't criticize without providing a solution, right? And so here's a solution, here's an idea, and we need to bring people together to discuss that, to figure out, because we know something is happening. And Republicans know something is happening, they do know, but the fear is that what change we make will make it worse. The whole, the idea that we want to keep things the way they are, because if we change things, it's going to be bad, not acknowledging that it already sucks, right? It's already bad. So, but I guess it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. And I think that is, the problem. So finding solutions, giving people ideas that, you know, are innovative and outside the box, I think will open people up a little bit more to the idea of change, right? And and so that's good to know. That I did not know that.
Yeah. I think we're still probably another like 5 or 6 years before that gets announced, but I know the thorium reactor stuff is definitely making the moves. But yeah, that's my own like pet thing. So
and keep in mind, there are going to be 4 reactors on at Plant Vogtle, 4 reactors on one site, right?
Yeah.
Georgia is the only state. Now there are nuclear reactors throughout the country, right? But Georgia is the only state that has 4 reactors in one place, one strategic, you know. And so, I mean, that has to be that's impactful. That has to be impactful. So
yeah, well, at the very least, even so, one thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand sometimes is how the concrete is made can sometimes cause problems, especially in a rural area, especially with water runoff, things of that sort. Like even just the stuff that the concrete was made of can leach into the ground. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things in there, and that's why studies are useful for that kind of stuff.
It is.
Okay, so that's me. I'm going to stop talking. Is any other questions? You can unmute if you have a question.
My last question. I'm just curious because of the work that you do, like what are some key challenges and obstacles you face?
Well, one key challenge that we face is the problem is so fast that that it's sometimes kind of hard to show all of it at once. It can be overwhelming. That's why I am of the opinion that we would approach environmental justice on the economic footing and then kind of draw down from there, right? How the economics affects it from housing to education. Another issue I think is the tribalism that Patrick was talking about. That is an issue because I've noticed that when I've talked to different groups, one of the things that people will say, well, why are you always going to Atlanta? You know, Atlanta's not the only one, you know, you need to come out to the rural area. And that's true. But I think that kind of leads to the disconnect, right? And the sense that we're not all into this in this together. So I think those are the 2 things: the problem being so vast, and then basically the tribalism that comes within Georgia. And then the third thing for me is my background is I'm not a scientist, and my background is more so in public policy around civil rights and economic and social justice, right? I worked more so in fair housing before with the city of Houston. I was ensuring that the city of Houston was basically following the Civil Rights Act, the fair housing law, especially in terms of the ADA. It's, you know, in its application of its policy and its ordinances, right? It's permitting, it's planning, all of that. It's money, you know. And so, but one of the things, so I was a little wary about coming into environmental justice because when you think of environment, you immediately think of science and you think of math and all of that stuff that comes into play. And so I came in it from a different side and a different approach. So just being able to bridge that divide and show it as a social aspect outside of just maybe a science aspect. When people start talking about PMIs and the amount of this and the amount of that and the different types of technologies, it can go over people's heads and it kind of glosses them over a little bit. And so that could be a challenge too. So taking that, I love what Science for Georgia is doing, taking science language and bring it to the public, right? And being able to, you know, get people to understand it, not in the layman's terms, but being able to understand it in the sense where they can apply it to their daily lives, right? Like, you know, like for instance, I finally understood, I always believed in climate change because that's just understandable. That's erosion, right? The climate changes, things happen, you know, it's you know, human beings, we've evolved, right? So like that comes with the climate too, you know? But one of the ways that I was able to understand or be able to explain climate change is to acknowledge that the climate naturally changes. We know this, right? We know the climate changes. The problem is that human activity has made it change at a faster rate than we have been able to evolve, right? because it's all supposed to be a balancing act. We're supposed to evolve with it, you know, and we're not, because it's speeding up because of the CO2 and all of the gases that are coming in, right? So that is the problem. And when I was able to understand that, then I was able to be able to articulate it in a more personal way, and then also to get other people to understand it as well.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Hey, this is the silent voice in the chat, Oscar Jones. I had a question. I don't know even if numbers are the way to go here, but I just want to throw it out and get your response on it. How would you characterize balancing with regards to policy work when you're talking to different stakeholders? Because I imagine in some ways, if you're talking to Georgia Power, you team up on certain things. If you're dealing with the government, you team up on certain things, or those tribes within community stakeholders, you know, the people who are living in a more affluent area that want to kind of prevent the bleed of the element, you know, or something like that, or vice versa, you know, people who are in the areas that are economically impacted, but they don't want stuff to go so expensive that they get, you know, pushed out of their homes. How do you, like, I guess it's still the key word is balancing. And I'll just pick one fight. If you're talking to Georgia about Georgia Power about Plant Vogtle, how much of that is, hey, let's be partners versus, hey, it's a new plant in my backyard, get out of here? You know, how do you?
Well, one way we have to
balance it.
One way we balance it is through the community, because a lot of people who live in Waynesboro work for Georgia Power, right? They work at Plant Vogtle. That is their bread and butter. It's almost like the Lorax, right? So we use that. We do that in working with the local officials there and the community residents who are employees, right, of Plant Vogtle. Another way we also are able to do that balancing is that there are mechanisms in place that the SRS and that Georgia Power has to assist people who have been impacted health-wise, and they can prove that they've been impacted health-wise based on their exposure to radioactive materials and based on their exposure to nuclear waste, right? We need to expand that more so for not just people who are working in the plants. We need to expand that to their family and people who are in the communities. So I think if we balance it in the sense that we don't want you all to leave because you are a resource. We just want you to be, you know, better stewards, right? And these are some ideas that we can have for you to be a better steward, right? Also, when you look at people who are close to facilities, maybe we could put in our policies, if the Environmental Justice Act passed, maybe a policy could be that these facilities, that they basically pay a tax, right? That goes to those homeowners to ensure that as they are beginning the process, as they grow in their wealth for their home, that it is not adversely impacted, right? Kind of like a balancing kind of thing. Well, like using your word, where they say, okay, we don't want the value to go down a little as low as this. Now that's price fixing that a lot of people don't like, but to me, that to me is a balance, right? That's if you want this plant here, and we need this facility here, we need the jobs, we need the resources, we want that here, but we also don't want to be impacted negatively, then you need to provide some type of floor for us that we don't go under, that we can be protected. And I think I think that would be the way to go. I think that's the partnership aspect of the way to go. Because you're right, people come out immediately and they're like, get out, get out, get out, get out, you know, and that's hard, right? That especially, I mean, Plant Vogel's been there for decades. They're not going anywhere. But we need to find a way for us to live right together and to do it in a way that is equitable. And I think maybe having something in place policy-wise that will allow people to be able to still benefit from the resources from this state will do that. Also with education, we know this, right? So maybe have the businesses, you know, be able to say, okay, we're going to pay a portion of education and do that. Now they do that. They give back in the sense of charity, but charity is, to me, is subjective, right? I give to the ideas and the causes that I like, right? We can't be charitable in well-being, right? Everybody deserves that. And that's where government comes in. And I think we need to also change the idea of how people think of government. When people say government, to me, it irritates me because it's like, a foreign entity that comes, that we live out of space and we come down here and rule you. No, we're government. It's us. We're self-ruled. We vote for the people who we're supposed to want, who we want. Now, do we do that enough? Do we, I mean, Georgia has like, we're 90% or more in terms of registration, but we only vote like less than 50% of the people are voting. So,
Right.
So that plays a role in that too, right? But we need to recognize that we have that power, you know, to do that. And then we need to try to find ways to come together to address the concern. So economics is how I would say we would do that.
Interesting.
I hope I answered your question, Oscar.
No, I mean, there's so much in there, and it of course, like all of these discussions, they start offshoots of discussions afterward. Because I mean, when you mentioned like Plant Vogel doing
Oscar, I'm sorry. Can you repeat your question? My kid was in my ear. I'm sorry. What did you say?
No problem. It wasn't a question. I was just observing that you answered it, but then there's other offshoots that happen in these kind of discussions, because like when you mentioned that the company, I think it was Vogel or Georgia Power, they invest in education in the community. Well, yes. that would almost be, you could look at that like Big Tobacco is investing in anti-smoking campaigns.
Exactly.
So like, oh, they must be good. Well, yeah, no, you're still selling the cigarettes so there needs to be somebody in there to say, all right, let's be clear. You guys are doing good. Thanks for like telling the kids not to smoke, but the reason they got stuff to smoke is you.
Well, so, also remember with the anti-smoking ones, that was lawsuits. Yes. That was lawsuits, and that was money that they were forced to pay into that. And we might have to end up having to do the same thing with stuff like this.
And you know that's happening. I know I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just think that in these cases, when you're talking about the competing priorities of all these stakeholders and doing the balancing act, probably also have to put some funding in there for a referee. I mean, we're in the SEC. I graduated University of Alabama, so roll tide. However, I like Georgia. I'm okay with Georgia. I owned Bulldogs growing up. We need a referee because at some point you can't just have two teams slugging it out. You need a ref to say, well, these guys aren't so bad, but they want to win. These guys aren't so bad, but they want to win, and they hit hard. So what are the rules? You know, you keep that reality in place and say, oh, well, it's good competition. It's football. It's the SEC. And then we can all root for an outcome where somebody's going to lose, but we can have like an outcome that is refereed, sort of. So
that's where the Environmental Justice Act comes in terms of looking at, and looking at that. And then also we're trying to change behaviors, right? If you think about what the government has done in the past in terms of getting states to basically, you know, approve laws, right? Take laws. Look at the NHTSA, the National Highway Safety Act. Administration. I used to work with NHTSA, National Highway Safety Administration, and they were pushing the safety belt law, right? Because at one time we didn't have mandatory or secondary safety belt laws. So like I didn't even put the seat belt. I remember my mother stopping, ram into the to the front, right? But now we have safety belt laws, right? And people fought against that and all that stuff. But now everybody, what do we do now? As soon as we get in the car, we put a safety belt on, right? And what the state did and what the feds did, they gave extra additional money for highway transportation through the DOTs. They gave additional money for those states that passed mandatory safety belt laws, right? Or, you know, so there's things that you can do. Look at the reason why the roads in Louisiana and New Orleans were awful, are still awful, is because their drinking age is low, right? Those states that passed 21 and above drinking age, we're getting more money from DOT for transportation. So like those are the things that, you know, the feds do in order to get states to go along with it. But that's something that the state of Georgia can do to get counties to go along with it. We can do certain things, and there's certain models that we can do to change behavior, you know, to get bad actors, you know, to people who are violators, or facilities that violate the Department of Energy's regulatory requirements. You know, we need to know about them, and they need to be removed, or they need to not continue to get permitting for running facilities in Georgia. There are steps that we can take. We just have to do it, and we have to have the will to do it. And those lawmakers that don't have the will, then we will go into their districts and their communities and we will inform their constituents, and we'll say, now you handle it, and we'll give them an idea of a candidate that wants to do something like that. This is the person who wants to do this, who sees this as an issue, because it's not going to change unless you change the leadership.
And I think that is a great ending statement. So again, thank you very much, Andrea, for coming out and talking to us. Thank you for everyone who attended. Yeah, this was excellent. This is exactly what we wanted these fireside chats to be.
Yeah, well,
like
thank
a
you.
chance to
I enjoyed it.
re-go and go through and actually have a great talk.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Weekend.
You too. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation. For more information on Science for Georgia's mission and our past work, visit our website at scienceforgeorgia.org.